morning on our New Year's event, and this is Preservation Beekeeping Council and Club. We meet on Saturday mornings, and we're going to be doing these live. We're still looking for the best venue to be able to do this, and our hope is that we'll have an international bee club. So, oh, good morning, Connie and Jane. So this is our first maiden voyage of hopefully many to come. And what we were going to do this month is we were going to make wasp nests, and I was in the hospital on and off with my husband the whole holiday, so I couldn't put together a crafts program. But next month, our option is we can either get together and make bait hives up here, or we can get together and make wasp nests. So I'm going to let us decide as a group what you want to do next month, and then we'll start running around and getting the pieces for it, because spring is very, 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 very close. We've had a really exciting few weeks as an organization. Our nonprofit is really coming along, and I'm gonna, in a minute, give Thea some time to update us. But all of our greatest dreams so far have been realized, except for money. But otherwise, you know, oh, cool. So money is coming today. This is good. And what I want to do some announcements about is, first, I want to start with a quote like I always do. And rather than read from the book, Heidi Herman, who is one of the trustees of the Natural Beekeeping Trust in England, has just come on board as a board member for our organization. And my favorite quote from her is, "I was a beekeeper once, and the bees have forgiven it." Isn't that a great way to start? So I remind myself of that as I wander around my yard. The first thing that we usually discuss is what's going on in the garden. What's the state of the garden? So Pixie, do you have anything to add? Come on up front so you can be here. Okay, Pixie's coming up front. Hold on, everybody. And make it so that you can see yourself in there.
How much of a delay is it?
That's about a minute.
But I have to be close. So obviously in this horrible weather, the only thing that's really going to take care of our plants at this time of the year, good morning, is the wild things and the trees. So don't mow your lawn, don't weed. Most people can't find their lawn, I realize that. But it's the wild things that are going to take care of us in the beginning. So if you can refrain from cleaning your yard until the wild bees start showing up, you will increase the quantity of wild bees in our gardens, because they live in those teeny tiny holes. Raspberries is one of their favorite for putting their babies. So don't put them in the compost yet. And from there, just hang on, it's still winter.
I wanted to say that this year I am thrilled that my borage is already up, and I'm seeing some of the first cresses of the year coming up, and even some sprouts on some of my berry bushes. So I am just hopeful that we might have an early spring this year. Now, when my rosemary bush is blooming, parts of it, so it's kind of exciting. Jacqueline, if you're going to want to talk at all, you're going to need to come up here. Yes? Oh, Cheyenne, you joined us. Awesome. You can shut it off and save the same conference number, and everybody just has to log back on after 40 minutes. Oh, she was listening to our conversation about Zoom. So we may try Zoom in the future. We'll see how that goes. Let's see, Jacqueline. Here. Scooch right next to there. And kind of maybe tilt the screen a little bit. So here she's showing up. She's showing up. There she is. Yep. You're gonna have to sit on the table, in the front of the table. Yeah, we're just learning this as we go. Thank you all for your incredible patience. So, okay. So that's what's happening in the garden. It's extremely exciting. I want to talk about what's happening in our hives at this time of the year. Jacqueline and I post regularly on the bee forums because people are going into their hives, a shocking amount of people. And it seems that the colder it gets, the more petrified people are and the more they're going into your hives.
It's the
So,
craziest thing because everyone knows you leave them alone in the winter. And yet, what I see all the time is, but I thought I'd just take a peek and I was just really quick. You know, the thing that happens with that is, is that you disturb them. If they're in torpor and you're like, anybody in there? You know, it's like all of a sudden they're in this deep, deep meditative reverie. You know, and I do believe there's something happening extra in there too. And when you go in and do that, you know, it's just like someone jarring you awake. They actually can like start to rouse, and you know, then that throws them off of their rhythm on it. What I believe is happening in there is that the bees in the wintertime go into this reverie, this meditative place that, as they say, um, it breathes the life into the flowers. So the flowers are in this nascent state where they're not formed yet. And this meditation, and meditation is my way of saying it because I think it's somewhat bigger, deeper, rounder, wider than that. They're actually increasing the life force of the blossoms and the flowers. So that's the floral geography of the year. Um, so anyway, I think it's really important not to disturb them. And what you see, I was just out in my hives yesterday. I have a lang that I never touch. I decided I should have one Langstroth hive just because I should, just so I could get to know it. But I treat it the same way as my worry. I never open it. I never go in it. But right out in front, so if it's got a little opening here, there's this little trail of dead bees in the front of it. And I probably had about 25 of them there yesterday, 20, 25. And what happens with that is someone, we see on the lists all the time, someone will say, oh, I came out and there were dead bees in front of the hive. So I opened it up and the bees were all dead and I cleaned it out. It's like, dead bees? No, you didn't have dead bees. Who do you think put those bees there? So in this brief little moment of, you know, like sunshine came out and for 3 hours it was maybe tolerably warm enough, not too cold that they could actually do a quick little house cleaning. They drag those little bodies out and they don't have enough energy in the wintertime to fly them off like they do the rest of the year. And I think that's why this is so upsetting to people because they don't realize when they're newer beekeepers that in the summertime, that little janitor bee, she takes that bee, drags it out, and then picks it up and flies off with it and drops it about 20 feet out or so. They just don't want to have a big cluster of dead bees here because it's going to attract unwanted attention. So in winter, what you've got is the janitorial staff drags the bee out and goes, good enough. And that's it. So when you see that, that's actually exclamation point of, yes, you have live bees, leave them alone. Please don't do anything with them. I have another top bar hive where I haven't seen a bee in it for a few weeks. I mean, I haven't seen a bee coming out of it for a few weeks now. It's a first year hive and it's 50-50. Might be alive, might not be alive. But the cardinal saying I like Michael Bush's saying about it is, you know, a dead bee is a dead bee, and a bee that's dead now is still going to be dead in springtime. So there's no reason to be opening up the hive and having a look-see and going, oh, I think it's dead, because this time of year you can't tell. A bee in torpor looks like a dead bee. And you're all nodding your head, so I know you all know this. We are not people who fuss around with our hives in the winter. But add on to that. I'm sure you've got something to say on that too.
No, that was really perfect.
And you've got a little spider walking across.
Yeah, I
the
know.
top.
It's going to be so great when we start talking about the echo floors, the little
floor.
tiny baby spider. Yeah. I just saw it. Yeah, I want to welcome Deb Cochran and Cheyenne Bone, and Jenny is with us too. Jenny Johnson from the East Coast. So we've got a slightly larger group here today. So that's a big issue. I have 4 hives alive right now, and they're all in skips but one that's in the cathedral hive. And anytime I look in through the entrances, I'm seeing the bees moving. Even on the coldest days, they haven't just stopped. There's this constant kind of shuffling and movement in them. So I'm hoping that means that indeed these are well insulated enough to give them a really cozy interior where they don't have to put all their energy into trying to warm themselves. Thea? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thea was pointing out that she uses a stethoscope on her hives. It's a great idea. It's a real unobtrusive way to just kind of hear them. Now, I've discovered that you can't hear in here with the stethoscope. It's so thick, it's like a bees. So it doesn't work on these. But anybody here have any questions about their bees or some concerns with how they're doing this winter? Mary Ellen?
I insulated. They're in mediums, 8 grain mediums. So I went from the smaller, sharply down, and then I got 3-inch pink foam and insulated every possible surface that I could find. Insulated and then covered, wrapped it with the quilted aluminum stuff. And towards the end of the season, when everybody was flying around, I started getting some invasion from the yellow jacket. So I'm really concerned. I haven't seen a lot of activity when the sun comes out. I put entrance reducers. I did everything I could. I don't know, and I'm not sure if I should pull out the stethoscope. I'm not sure I could hear through 3 inches. What? Oh, okay. Yeah. But I guess I'm just like, I'm not sure I want to know the truth.
Right.
Kind of feeling.
No gain.
I'm like, I just want to have hope.
Mary Helen brings up a very interesting point, and then in Portland, some people are still seeing yellow jackets out even after all this cold, and they're poking around in the hives. So I am very happy that that I haven't had many yellow jacket problems, and this hive is going to need a little bamboo piece placed in it. I think the round bamboo tubes are the ticket for keeping out yellow jackets. I just really do. So if anybody can switch over to that and let me know how it goes for you, I would love to know. Not only are the entrances small, I keep about like that big, inch and a half, but I think the real trick is the depth. I make them all about like that long so that the yellow jacket can't just creep around not even a full inch of wood and be in the hive. They have to run this gauntlet that's totally lined with bees. So their chances of making their way in there without creating a panic is not good. Yeah.
Question: if you are working with Langstroths and want to convert to putting a hole with the bamboo in, would you put it in the second box up?
I would put one in every box I had because I'd always, if you're shuffling boxes up or off.
Yeah, I'm just not wanting to drill holes.
Mm-hmm.
Want them if you can just create a place that seal. I don't use them. So,
Wherever you want to put it, make sure it's not close to the bottom because that way, both Jacqueline and I and many other people have lost hives because the winter drop of bees is so big, the entrance gets plugged and they literally suffocate. So I like higher entrances. So anywhere up on the first or the second box would be fine.
Yeah, I'm just, gonna try to retrofit that in, and
Mhm.
I'm concerned, I don't want to drilling holes where there are bees in and frames in, and, they've got established colony and brood, just trying to put that in and retrofit it, if you have any suggestions for gracefully doing that.
I have on mine, I had my husband drill some holes in there, and I just keep, I have a ball of wax that looks kind of like a mushroom. And when they're not using something, I stop it up. So in the wintertime, they would all be stopped up, but I've had hives that have wanted to have 2 or 3 entrances even. So you might want to, don't be quite so concerned about it, because you can always put a stopper in it. It's just like putting a cork in it. And actually, that's what it is. It's a cork with a ball of wax that I kind of molded around it so that I could use it like a handle.
Just know I'm gonna go in there and disturb the things, because of course they've bridged frames, they've, made their own, like, Emerald City in there. And, so I'm a little reluctant to do that.
Don't worry about it this time of year. Do it in springtime. It'll be just fine. And you'll get to see too. They'll pick ones that they like this, Nobody's going in this one up here. It's like, okay, good, that one seals off.
Oh my gosh, Jan made it from Normandy. Hooray! Hi, Jan from Normandy.
Hey, hello,
So,
Jan.
I'm seeing it. Yeah, this is great.
I have to hire.
Oh, and Janine and Dennis are here. We have like a whole virtual crowd. Yes. So one of the questions from Cheyenne is, what can we say about insulation and ventilation? And insulation and ventilation is really tricky with Langstroth hives because the box is really big. It's got the corners. The bees have a problem setting it up with their comb because they have to make these straight little rows. And people are always like popping the lid to ventilate it or adding more holes to ventilate it. And what we've been taught is that the way to avoid having to play all these ventilation insulation games is go in, insulate the heck out of it, leave it like that. Don't have a lot of extra entrances, maybe just a tiny hole up at the top, like a 1B hole, and your round entrance somewhere else on it, and leave it. Because every time we pop something, readjust something, it changes the entire gestalt inside that hive. Like it's all of a sudden like, well, okay, they just changed the HVAC system. Now we have to rearrange everything. Maybe we have to move our brood. Maybe we, so it's like we're of the set it and forget it camp. But when you set it, you have to set it right. Insulate the heck out of them. They need it during the summer. They need it all winter. One small entrance. And the bees can manage their interior space perfectly well if we're not always opening, changing, shifting, cocking. So that's what we believe about insulation.
And I think one of the things now I'm going into year 15 now. And in my early years, I became aware of the fact that we needed to have it warmer in the winter. But I kept thinking that, well, in the summer, they certainly don't need warmth, so I'll pull apart my insulation system. So I did that for a few years even. And then I just sort of dawned on me, like, wait a minute. One day, all of a sudden, no coats. It's cold. You still have days where the weather is going like this, and then it's hot. And then all of a sudden, one day, everybody piles all the coats on top of you again. And I realized that in these, and I brought in a tree hive that we'll drag over here in a few minutes. I brought in a tree hive, and it's got inches of insulation that stays on it year round. And the bees don't have to accommodate any of my human whims for what I think the weather is going to be today, tonight, and next month. There's just a wisdom in that because they get to know the home the way it is and can make accommodations. And hey, they're bees. They know how to plan for the future. So leave them alone just the way they are. But I really think that when we're making this insulation system, we have to keep in mind that it's going to be a year-round thing too. it's just as important to keep them, to let them have the capacity to cool in the summer according to their plans.
From what I've read and studied, the insulation in the summer is actually even more important for them to get the evaporative cooling thing going. Now, Cheyenne says she's had problems with mold in the inside of her top bar hives in the back. That's really common because the bees are moving from one end to the other, not front to back. So in a hive where they're moving vertically, the warmth is up at the top. By the time they've made it up to the top, it doesn't matter if these have gotten a little bit moldy, but when they're working from this way in a top bar to the back of the hive, if this is all moldy and cold by the time they get there, that's not really great. And that's one of the problems that I have with top bar hives. And so
In our area.
Yeah, in our area. So we try to keep them under cover. Definitely keep them under cover so rain's not against them all the time. Don't use the entire hive. I have my top bar hive, so it's only about that much being used. I have the back closed off with a follower board and a big pillow of stuffed straw in back, so it's insulated. And then on top of the bars, I have inches of insulation on top of the bars, so that keeps the condensation from the top. I personally am not wild about horizontal hives. I think they're great for beekeepers because it's all right there. You know, you're not stacking and changing. But I think the bees have a much easier time from a temperature standpoint in using vertical space. So, you know, this is something we all have to kind of explore. And one of the things that both of us are aware of is that Langstroths really encourage people constantly tinkering with the hive, add something on top, change the feeder arrangement.
Lift it up so you get better ventilation.
Yeah, and then they say, oh, my bees are honey bound. Like that means that the queen has nowhere to lay. It's like everything's been put in honey and she's roaming around. It's like, oh, quick, add another box. Bees in the wild don't have a problem getting honey bound because their hives aren't changing. They're not having bottoms added and tops added or sides added. There's one area that they understand and know and can work with. And I think whatever hive style you have, don't be adding and decreasing the size on it because it's just confusing to the bees. Mary Helen.
I think philosophically and practically the difference is that in the wild, the bees own their hive. And in, domesticated,
They're renters.
commercial
Yeah.
environment, yeah, they're sort of, renters or, they're our hives.
Mm-hmm.
We even say our hive,
Mm-hmm.
my hive. And it's just interesting, maybe it's subtle, but it's like, wow, that's a huge difference.
It really is.
Energetically as well.
It really is. Bees have such autonomy when they're up in some tree someplace. Nobody's putting their fingers in, nobody's claiming ownership of them. And Mary Helen, that's a beautiful point. I think maybe we should look at all of our bees as not being our bees. That, we're kind of helping 10, but want to make it as simple for them as we possibly can. Not with changes that they have to address all season, all the time. So, okay, Dennis, this is Dennis up in Connecticut who took our classes for years. He's just finished with 2 top bar hives, 2.5 to 3 inches thick. And it's got a fall away zone in the bottom and a gauntlet entrance. I think this sounds awesome. He says, should we insulate it further? I think 2.5 to 3 inches of thick wood is probably really, really, really good. And adding the fall away to the bottom is really good. It's a little harder to do in a top bar hive than in the other hives we're going to talk about today. So, okay, can we show the other beekeepers in the room? Okay, lift that puppy up. Here we go. And if anybody can think of better ways we can do this, please do. So here's our gang.
There he is. So I'm going to talk about wild hive that I have here.
Can you tip it forward so
Yeah,
people
I'm
can
going
see
to
it?
roll
Okay.
it forward.
Put it sideways. There we go. Thank you. I don't think most people get to see one of these. This was my first tree hive. So this is probably, I'm going to guess 11 years ago is when I got this hive. And somebody called me in the winter, in November, and they just cut a tree down in their driveway. It's a alder hanging across the driveway, cut it down. When it hit the ground, they realized it had bees in it, probably about 20, 25 feet up. So I schlepped this whole big thing home. This was about 11 feet long. And when I finally got it home, we set it up. Joseph cut it. And this hive, I want to say, they went through hell on it. First of all, they got knocked down and the top of the hive broke off. And that was where all their honey was. And it was November. So I had to feed them through the winter. And I'm not going to give you the whole history of everything. This is what happened years later. The reason he was cutting the tree down is because alder gets punky and this tree was starting to have a big lean to it. And by punky, I mean it starts to, do this. I mean, it's bendy wood here. And he was concerned over his driveway that someday it was going to fall on his car or him. So anyway, when he cut this down, that was one of the things that I knew from the beginning was that this tree was not going to last a really long time. I was getting it kind of at the last end of it. So when we erected it so that it was standing straight up again, we actually put a concrete post behind it, about a 5-foot tall concrete post, and then wrapped it to it. I think we put chains around it even to make sure it held. It weighed this weighs like 1,000 pounds when it was 11 feet tall. So anyway, this is on the inside. I couldn't see the inside until years later when, a few years later, what I did was I migrated these bees into another section. We, the first year, I put a small warre box on top of it, on top of one of these sections. And then the second year I added another warre. So what I've got is actually a hybrid, this tree hive on the bottom going up to warre on the top. And then after another 2 years, we sawed off about 3 feet down and moved that whole warre tree hybrid to another location. And this stuff was starting to get kind of punky. So anyway, this has been standing alone and I haven't really done anything with it. I think we probably did that a number of years ago. Anyway, yesterday I got Joseph out there to cut a section so I could bring in. It doesn't have bees in it anymore. But look at the width, the depth of the insulation here. Isn't that amazing? This is what bees are living in our area. This isn't a little, how big is, like ½ inch? Is that what we give them to live in hives? ½ inch. And this is, 4 inches at its thinnest part and more like 5 inches where the thicker parts are. And every single part in here, I have another piece of it. Every part in here is deeply propolized, deeply propolized. So every little nook and cranny that's in here, let me see, every little nook and cranny that's in here is completely filled with propolis. There's not even really any sharp edges on it. And fragrant as all get out. Here, Victoria, pass that around. Just breathe that. So they completely sealed off everything inside of here and sealed down a good long ways. Now the hive itself actually stopped. Let me see, I think it probably went about 3 feet down. And then the tree was still hollow underneath here. And that's their fall away. Anything that they have no use for up in the hive gets to fall away. And we're going to talk about a little bit more about that in a minute. But nonetheless, they went down a good ways below the hive itself and continued propolizing down. And then down at the bottom, they don't go down in there. That's the nether world. So this fall away is really important because it's a space where things like, if they have any parasites, for example, that can fall off. And it's not like being in a regular human-made hive where it falls off and it just the little mite sits there and waits for the next bee to come along and latch a ride and go head on back right up there again. In this, if somebody grooms another bee and the mite falls away, it's gone. It's a long ways down. And in the bottom of these, I've seen a few of them now, you have this wonderful collection of, of detritus. It's just anything that's in there. And obviously inside of here, what you're going to find is pretty much wood that's been chewed away, eaten away, or, it's in the decay process for the tree itself. And there's all these little insects in there. And some of them are little tiny ones, and some of them are bigger ones. There can be sow bugs in there, potato bugs. Those pseudo scorpions are in there that I understand can sometimes have been attributed to eating mites, like liking the taste of mites. How cool is that? Millipedes. What else have you seen in there?
I have spiders
Centipedes,
that make homes, that
Yep.
raise nests
I actually cleared
the
out
bottom.
some spider web out
Yeah.
of the bottom of this one that was
Yeah.
an old spider
When
web.
they
It was
hatch
like-
out, I mean, when you consider how tiny those little bitty guys are and how ravenous that they are, those little baby spiders eat up a lot. And in the bottoms of mine, I have entire ant colonies living in them that just come and go. Mary Helen?
And the bees don't seem concerned.
Can we talk about my house later?
Yes, I will.
I also noticed a symbiotic relationship with mycelium in the lawn. I had the good fortune, I can pass the phone around it. I got a maple. It's probably about 4 feet tall. It's not, I don't think it's ever had bees in it, but it was hollow and I've taken it out and wrapped it. My friend Brian came with his trailer and another friend came with a chainsaw and we hauled it and it's sitting in my driveway. I sealed the bottom part of it, it's upside down. And I'm gonna site it this spring and move it into some location and hopefully catch a swarm. But there's already a lot of mycelium already growing inside of there, and it's this big around. I mean, it's gonna take a few people to move it. But I'm interested, as a study, and maybe the group wants to use this as a potential experiment, a group study, and have it be a community effort to observe this, and because it doesn't have bees in it yet, and it's really thick. The walls are probably, this thick in some places.
Nice.
So anyway, but the mycelium piece is so important, and I know that Paul Stamets is doing a lot of research on fungi and mushrooms by more common name, and bees and their health. And so I think that we can observe what they already know, and they've already put together in their hives, in tree hives.
Are you talking about mycelium?
Yeah.
When I've looked inside of these, what I've seen is anywhere where it's propolized doesn't have that. The propolis seems to be it's a seal against it. But in the lower parts, absolutely. And even yesterday when I was taking this log, the piece that I didn't take that was next to us, I had them cut me 2 3-foot pieces, 2.5-foot pieces that were carryable size. But it was already growing little turkey tails on the side of it, and some other things that were pinkish orange that were growing on it.
4 rounds about this size that I'm going to this year do stack them, have like a 2-stack, and then put them up on wooden spools. I think spools are great hive stands. It just like finally clicked. Like, duh, what a great idea. So, and I'll seal, the attaching piece, but those 4 rounds that I have, I looked in them yesterday and all of them have sprouted mushrooms inside, all growing inside. I'm not around here when I put the 2 rounds together. I will probably put the rounds together when I clone my skeps. So I'm just going to put on what I put on the outside of my skeps to join the 2 pieces. I will put on a mixture of cow dung, chopped straw, clay, water, and a little bit of wood ash, and just glop it on and then set the hive on top of it, and that will kind of seal it up.
My cow is still pooping 80 pounds a day.
Yay.
So if anybody needs any of that, you know where to get it. 80 pounds a day.
Okay. Barry, can you come and get this guy? And then I'll show what I have here on my echo floor. Now, we believe that absolutely any hive can be retrofitted for an echo floor, okay? This is, now I brought this because nothing I make looks nice. Everything I make just looks junky. So I figured none of you can be intimidated, right? Like, you can at least do this, okay? At least this. So this is a very old Lang. There's spider webs inside of it. This hive, this was the stand for this skep this last year. This is the skep that would not take a new queen, never was okay past May. Her bees survived until the cold snap in December. This whole group, 200 bees, just kept going. Nobody wanted to become a laying worker. There's still a little bit of honey sealed in this hive. It's just bizarre. So this is what they did in the course of their summer. It's not very extensive. There we go. There they are. See it a little bit on the inside. There you go. That's what they built out so far. There's still bees in it. And this was their stand. And I made the stand by just, sticking the Lang on top of its holder. Leave that right there. Yeah. And just any size hole that's big enough so that it can fall through. Now, what I do on all of my followaways, so you can do this on a Langstroth hive.
So she's got an opening about that big.
And on some of mine, the openings are bigger, and on some of them, they're slightly smaller, but here's a hole in the top that you can see. This was kind of a smaller one because I didn't have my bandsaw. Now I have equipment. So just these two boards across the top, and I fill the inside. What we'll do is, I think I'm just going to break this because I can redo this later. This can at least come off because it's not well attached, or else it can't. There it is. There. Okay. So we'll bring the computer over in a minute for you to look in the bottom of this, and anybody else, as soon as I'm finished talking, you can come over. I left it exactly as it was. So there's dead bees, there's the detritus from the hive. And what I fill mine with is, just tree mold, big chunks. You don't want to use little bitty pieces, like if you use wood shavings or sawdust, they will carry it all out. So, they're weird about it. So it's just all crappy old wood balls. And usually what I add to it, here you can pass this around, what I usually add to it is like a handful of vermiculture compost, just get the worms and the bugs and the interesting stuff growing in it. Fill this about half full. Now, I like, you can put a little door in these. You could make this with a Lang medium or a super or anything else. If you have a Warre box, you take your Warre box and put it on the very bottom. So your entrance is in your upper box. And this just becomes a place that's the fall away zone. The handy thing about having the little door is that you can see if tons of bees are dropping, if something's going on there. That's how I figured out one of my hives got poisoned this last summer. I opened it and there were thousands of dead bees down in the bottom. So the little door enables you to slide food inside, food dishes, honeycomb. You're going to see a couple of coils of hops. When my hops were fragrant and had a lot of pollen, I just cut off chunks because Hop Guard is a miticide that they're using, and I thought, oh, okay, varroa mites aren't supposed to like hops, so you can throw herbs in here or flowers or anything you want, and
Inevitably there'll be little pieces of comb that fall away.
yeah, and anything you can put whatever you want in there. Yeah, hi Brian, come on in. And so One of the problems that Phil Chandler has had with these, he's the guy in England who kind of developed the idea of eco floors, and his gripe about them has been that they get dried out, and then when they're dried out, that kind of moistness and the whole compost thing ain't happening. Well, if you keep your hives tight with just the small entrances and you're not popping ventilation and you don't have screen bottoms, the humidity is going to settle in here a lot better and you are going to be able to keep more of a moist environment. However, if it dries out to heck, you've got this little door. You take your little spray bottle of water and you go, and then you seal it up and there you go. So I like the little doors on them. They're easy to make and they're handy as heck. I can go in here and do what I need to do with my bees, and I cannot bother my bees a bit. It's up here, there's the bottom. I'm doing all my futzing around down there. If I want to see up into the hive, I take my hand, a little phone, and I stick her in the hive, and I take a picture, and I can see what's happening inside the skep as it's developing. So I think that eco floors of this type with a door in them are especially good. So you can do it with a Lang, you can do it with a Ware hive, you can do it with a top bar hive. The trick to the top bar hive is you have to cut that bottom board out, the narrow piece, and you have to make a little cavity down there to hold
So
it.
let me tell you, so I had a top bar hive a few summers ago that I was, it was not summer, it was late spring, and I got a swarm, and I put him in there. And just before I did, I took all this detritus that I have. So I have a few tree hives. I know what's in there. I took some clumps of it and I spread it all out in the bottom of this top bar hive. And the first thing they did when they got in there was they took every single piece out, every single piece. Man, I gave them hours and hours of extra work that they didn't need. The reason they took it out, I'm kind of tuned into them. The reason they took it out is they looked at the inside shape of this top bar hive and looked at how long they were going to make their combs, and it was going to be too close. So there was no fall away space in it. The fall away is actually really critical. Otherwise, the bottom of the comb is going to be sitting right down in the bug laden. I mean, they like this symbiotic relationship, but they don't want it in bed with them. So they pulled out everything because, and when I looked later at the size that they were building their combs, here's the bottom of the top bar hive, and the comb ends right about here. So there was no room for an echo floor. And, my echo floor was about there. So that's why they cleaned it all out. They were meticulous. There was not a speck of anything left at the bottom afterwards. And then they got going building it. So they had already imagined how they were going to fill that space before they even started on the top parts, and cleaned it out and made it as big as they needed it to be. So that's what I want you to get, is that the fall away is just as crucial as the echo floor is itself. That relationship of how much hive are the bees taking up, how far the comb goes, the fall away space that differentiates those two worlds, and then the echo floor below it.
So these bigger boxes work really well for that.
Yeah.
Bigger, taller boxes. And so you've got a lot of space down there, and you can refill it, throw new bugs into it. If you find chunks of mycelium when you're out walking around in the boonies, just pick it and throw it in. Now, also with these, let's see, what was I going to say? Oh, I have a log hive too, and it's a fairly short round, and it got built out totally, and it had about this much of little echo floor in the bottom. And this is how much, okay, they came down because the comb stopped like right here, and I'm going to pass this around. This is the back, which they didn't do anything to, facing the ground. So you can see the difference between here, just the kind of scuzzy stuff on the back, and they propolized the whole top. So they just went around the sides and just propolized all the way across the bottom. So I got to make sure to have nice fall away space. And I'm happy with anybody who wants to live in here. And so far, as has been my experience the last few years, ants have made like no difference at all. Now, my guess is that if ants crawl into a normal beehive and they have nowhere to nest and they're just crawling all over the place, it could be bothersome to the bees, especially if the hive's not really strong. But when they have their nest in the bottom, they just kind of come up, do what they need to do, and go back down. That's where all the activity is. I don't see them up in the hives much, and I don't see that the critters are being, the bees are being bothered by them. We also have wax moths that breed in the bottom, and they hang out and they eat the wax that drops. So,
And wax moths are our friends. You know, we have a real different attitude about that. When I see wax moth in a hive, they're not in the primary part of the hive that's being used right now. What they're doing is they're serving a purpose. They're taking this old comb, like this piece, you know, that's not going to get used for anything again, and eating it up and taking it away, really. They're like, you know, part of the garbage collection role in here. So when I see them, that's totally fine. This spring, after we had a spring class up in the barn, we forgot to put we had taken out a top bar hive and we're showing it in the class. This is almost a year ago, showing it in the class. Afterwards, everything got put away except for one hive that got tucked under the table and it had some old comb in it. It was just an empty. And I didn't find it for about 3 or 4 months. And it was the biggest collection of wax moths I've ever seen. There were like 1,000 wax moths in there. And I had opened it up and we were just about at the place where it was about to like do another leap in population. And I have to say, even though I'm one who doesn't kill a lot of things, I didn't kill the wax moths, but I did take them down and introduce them to my chickens, who were just like absolutely thrilled with doing it. What I realized was I was creating a population that was out of scale with my area. And I did that. That was a human mistake that caused it. So it was a human who went and fixed it and introduced the chickens to him. So it took him about 40 minutes.
I sort of had a fun moment with wax moths myself maybe a few weeks ago. I was moving a silver maple chunk to PCC Rock Creek in like North Hillsborough in their community garden, their education garden there on the Portland Community College campus. And
Speak up real loud so they pick it up here.
hello, everybody.
you can turn that around if you want to.
And it had been a Bible hive that summer that had success. And there was this massive, it was like penguins. It was like maybe 200 penguins this tall, you know, all shoulder to shoulder, all in a hunk. So the total mass was like this tall and about this big, just nothing but wax moths, all snuggled as little buggles in one little high area of where the hive had been. I'd never seen that before. I'd always seen them sort of stretched out and trying to root around and make a little divot in the top bars of the line hives. But I meant to ask, Jacqueline, when you were describing creating an eco-floor in a top bar hive, were you saying, and this is me imagining it in case I didn't see it because I was a bit distracted, if you put mesh that'll allow bugs but not bees, could you make a little additional box below that could eco-floor?
You can, but you also want to maintain the moisture.
Right.
And that.
There's only a mesh between bees and eco-floor, not eco-floor and the rest of the
Oh, I see. You know, I don't keep them from going anywhere.
Oh,
I just think it's important that you let them decide for themselves.
oh, I
if
see.
they
So when
need
that cleaning out happened, it was like, well, you're doing what you want
Yeah.
anyway. Even if they're taking out the eco-floor, you want to for them.
Yep, just give them access to it. It's just like, you know, some people keep the queen, what is that
Queen excluder.
excluder
Right.
that they put
She's even
across?
forgot the name. It's so out of her brain. It's just,
Yes, the queen excluder is like the queen needs to go everywhere. You don't need to put that in there. So I feel that way about a lot of things in there. I have to trust that the bees understand far more about it than I do. So yeah.
The other thing I'll add about wax moths and their importance is that a portion, some portion, a good portion of what's going to be in ecoflora is probably going to be dead wax moth larvae and the food, the frass that they pass down to the bottom.
Yep.
So oftentimes in a bee tree, There's a lot of little house. And I just imagine that is larval food, the black spot, having digested that black.
Let's see. We got a really interesting series of photos that I'm not really prepared to show today with all this from Jan in Normandy, who said that he's been using ecofloors in his hives and he does it totally different. He said that his research shows that if you cut the larger rounds of wood so the surface is exposed, they hold a lot of humidity in them. And so rather than just a big jumble like I throw in, he has all these beautiful little rounds with all the other little rounds of wood between them. And it's really a pretty flat, tidy floor.
Sort of the chaff. And
Yeah.
stuff filling in the.
Yeah. So like mine is
filling
a
the empty
big
spaces.
jumble where I just throw stuff in, and his looks artistic and beautiful and wonderful. So
Jan, we'll try and get that to show, on the next meeting that we have. We're just technical-wise, this is our first run.
yeah, and what I'll probably do also is try to post some of those photos on our blog, if that's okay.
So did you all get a picture of what he's got? So on the echo floor, he's got this, but it's about half this
About
high.
half that high.
And he's got rounds, branches that are cut off
Slice.
into sections like this and just lined up.
So they're
all
little,
around.
like it looks like when you build like a cordwood wall with all the little rounds, then you just put it that way.
And then all the other stuff is just sort of packed in between. So it's maintaining its own moisture, which was the question that we've got, is how do we keep the moisture level appropriate? But as the wood is rotting, there's a moisture present in it. So it's a wonderfully clever solution, Jan. Thank you so much.
Just to clarify, so it's and
Yes.
so the exposed part is bottom and top.
Yes.
The sides, the most
Are just,
exposed are sealed still with
Yeah.
stays.
Yeah, and then stuff filling in all the little gaps around them so that it really looks like a floor across it.
Yeah, it looks very nice. You can eat off of
So
that.
neat.
You built it that way. Now,
This is ours.
this is ours. So, I'm a rustic kind of a beekeeper gal. Now let's see. There was something else. Okay, for top bar hives, an easy fix is you can just take a saw and get that bottom narrow board out, and you can just buy a big round piece of PVC tubing that makes a nice deep, and just cut the top of it off, and you've got this nice round fall away that just drops down at the bottom and just, yeah, like a half pipe. And you can even set it up if you want so that it goes into grooves or is hooked on so that you can remove it every now and then and look at it and see what you've got and dump it or refresh it or something like that. So it's not a hard fix, but we believe that these can be put on all hives, and we really believe that this is part of a healthy hive system that we're missing in the way that we conventionally do these.
One of the things I think about is I remember years ago that I suddenly became aware of the fact that a significant portion of what I call me is not me. It's bacteria and it's like the bioflora, and my biome is how much? Does anybody remember the numbers? It's something like
It's kind of a 10-to-1 ratio. You're 1/10 you and 9 parts
1/10 me and
other.
9 parts. Yeah, and I've heard it 70% or 80, 90%. Is like something that I call me is here, but I'm populated by a great deal of other that make up me. And I believe that's one of the things, a mistake that we've made in our human taking care of hives, is that we've asked the bees to be independent of their biome, which for them, part of it is external to them as well. Their home is part of their biome. So when we do this, we allow that balance to come back in again. I think that's really critically important for the health, the really excellent health of these hives. Yeah?
That's one of the reasons why logging is done, or when there's a cut down in the forest, taking out all the dead wood is a bad idea because of all the nutrients and all the living things that use the detritus and all the wood to stay alive and to nurture the forest. So there are alternatives
Yeah.
to the traditional, scour and remove
Good point.
I wanted to point out the fact that, there's an awful lot going on in the medical world these days talking about the human biome and how our gut flora is almost non-existent these days compared to how it should be, because a lot of the foods we're eating are, for one, super clean, and for two, way less nutritious with less components in it than it used to have. So when I just watched a long show last night on the huge extent of food allergies within this country that are coming up that were never seen before, and even in little babies and things. And they're laying it all at the door of, my takeaway was, kids don't get in the dirt. There isn't any clean dirt, and there aren't any kids in dirt. And basically, dirt is where you get your biome. You get it from your family. You're born with part of it, but then the rest of it is the microbes that you pick up. Now, Michael Bush says that there are thousands of creatures who live in a space like this, and not just creatures, but bacteria and yeast and good funguses and good molds and all kinds of things. And so when you consider, when you put bees in a real clean, tidy hive, they're starting to say that bee nutrition is poor and that the bee gut biome is failing too. I think that this is the missing piece. That if you keep this up, alive, moist, and functioning, and the bees, they go down in it. I mean, when I open it or I'm feeding them, I see bees working around down there and moving around the bottom. So we are allowing our bees to get their feet in good dirt. And if we let the bees do it, and if we start doing it, we're not going to have all these ridiculous peanut allergies and, stuff that we have to be gluten-free because we can't even eat food anymore. So this is a huge missing part of a hive, and we're real proponents of this. So see what you can do to get some boxes on your hives. And if you need some mulch, come over to my house, or just rake your yard. It's not rocket science, but let's all do this for spring. I think all of us have worked really hard to insulate our hives. We can keep doing more of that this summer, and let's all get boxes onto the bottom of them and see what we see.
One thing I want to add to that, a few summers ago, we had some wood, just wood that was piled up, and we had left it outside too long. We heat with wood, but we had left it outside too long and it was starting to degrade, which that's a human way of saying it was starting to rot, and it had lots of other stuff on it than just wood. So we didn't want to bring it in the basement and, make our own echo floor. But what was so fascinating was Joseph took the chainsaw and he chainsawed them down into smaller rounds. My bees came out of the woodwork. They were all over this little pile of the chaff that comes off the sawdust. It's really sawdust. And the sawdust was probably about a half-inch thick in that whole area where he was chopping everything up. And the bees were just burying their noses in it. And they were just so excitedly happy. And I was thinking, what in the world? This is a tree, so it doesn't have any nectar or anything that I could even imagine was sweet in it. What it did have was all of the little fungal stuff that was starting to rot it. And I was going back looking at these going, oh yeah, it's covered with, and I know some of them like turkey tail and a few other things that were on there that are immune system enhancers. And the bees were in there getting it and bringing it home. Now, I don't know how they were using it. Maybe they were putting it into their propolis, who knows? But if they're bringing home spores and they've got an echo floor, they've got their own little greenhouse. They've got their own little garden. Mary Helen.
I've been experimenting with biochar and not necessarily, setting it up for them, but just having biochar that I bury in places that's partially exposed in the ground or in my biofilter.
Yeah, available, making it available.
Making it
Yeah.
available, and they come and they, suck the water up through it. They sit on it. They're obviously collecting something from it, and I just find that really fascinating that they appreciate that. That broken down. It's starting to break down, and it's transforming, and it's degrading, as we would say. But
And they're participating with it.
Different.
Yeah.
And so, that's part of their transformational piece, their role, I think, is to be a part of it.
I find that so exciting because that participation, that interaction that they have with it, that's something that's not talked about in beekeeping at all. And yet the bees are going out going, this is something we want, we need, we have to have this, and bringing it back, whether it's biochar or whether it's the fungus and the wood chips. It's something crucially important to them. And I think this is the key. We're all talking about the same thing here, that it becomes like a laboratory for them.
Practical question, so you're not putting your hive on a stand, you're putting it on the ground?
No,
Okay.
I don't put any of my hives on the ground. This is on a stand at home that's taller than that table. Everything I have is on a table height stand.
So your ecofloor has a floor underneath?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to do the screen bottoms. Something about it doesn't feel right to me, so I don't. So what I have is, I've got a complete box. It's, bottom on the top, bottom on here, set it down, put the hive right on top.
We're so scientific about it, it doesn't feel right. But, often I find that it takes me 3 years to figure out why did I have that feeling that wasn't the way to go. And then I watch the interaction of the bees for a few years and go, oh, now I get it. I'm so glad I followed my intuition on this.
Yeah. Well, I am going to say that, I've just become a fan now of wooden spools. So for hive stands, I think they're just awesome. They're solid. They're
right out in my
usually
car
free.
for you today.
Yes. So, Jenny also mentioned that she said maybe the bees are using their ecofloor and the cohabitants in there to alert them to other conditions. Because whatever bugs are in there, they'll be passing on information to the bees about what's happening outside. Are the ants particularly hungry? Are what is the village doing down there that could have information for the bees up on top, which makes sense. So yeah, I mean, what an easy fix for your hive. Something really healthy and really simple. And the little door is really helpful. It's really helpful. So add that in, and then you can get into it without having to get into your bees and mess with the top part. Any questions?
That's a comment, which is bouncing off of what Jackson just said, is that when Paul Stevens was looking at some of his garden beds and noticing that there were bees doing what they do in their cold shower and stuff like that. And so the 3 species, which are, and lion's mane is a good species in particular. So if you're interested in doing any inoculation in your hives, that might be a fun thing to experiment with, because it's got a real, a scientifically proven sort of virus suppression, life expectancy lengthening effect for bees.
Okay, I tell you what.
And reishi is another one which is readily available.
I'll tell you what we should do as a group. Everybody get busy on your ecofloors before spring. And come springtime, when we're all set up and ready to go and our ecofloors are all in, let's get together and do an order for some of the mushroom sporing that Stamets has. And we'll put it in our floors.
I think what I'd recommend too is, having seen my bees go into the wood chip, the sawdust, and extract and bring it back to the hive, I think that's probably a safer way for us to do it too, rather than saying I'm going to introduce it. Is just say, here, it's available, and then let's all watch and see. Did everybody climb on it going, yeah, we need lion's mane, we like reishi or whatever, and see what their response is in connecting their hives, their homes, with what's available. It's a great idea. What a nice little connection we all just made there.
Cool.
Experiment.
Cool.
Yeah, on the floor and producing pathogens. There was a study I read once about nursing mothers and their babies who live on dirt floors, and that the mothers would actually produce the antigens for any pathogens that were picked up through the milk because of the environment they were living in.
Perfect.
Of course.
Perfect, of course. Well, you all know that I go barefoot all summer, so I do a dirt thing in my yard all summer long, and I just think it's good for us to be in dirt. What I'd like to do
My
is
dog's so happy to hear you say that.
it's be in dirt.
And try and compliment for parents out of having cesarean birth.
Yeah, and Yeah.
to get exposed to it. You know, one of the things that just in passing too, one of the ways that the bees pass on that inner biome too is in cultures that aren't as as clean as we are, where we can go buy baby food on the shelves. Those cultures, the mother chews up the food first and then feeds it to the baby. So everything that's in her digestive biome is heading over into the baby. It's actually out of here and into there. And the bees do the same thing when they're gathering the pollen. You know what happens? That bee flies in with the pollen tacked on her thighs, and some bee who's one of the younger bees on the inside, one of the kitchen bees, comes out and actually takes it off and puts it in her mouth and carries the pollen back. And that's what triggers that whole processing of the pollen. So the pollen that you get, that's, if you have a pollen screen on the outside, and I see people selling pollen all the time, it's like, that's just flower pollen. On the inside, what they've done is when that bee gets over to the cell and takes the pollen out of her mouth, now it's mixed with her digestive fluids, and that creates a whole another thing. And I know if you've eaten any of the pollen out of the hive, it's got a tang to it. It's fermented. It's got a whole process going on, and that process has multiple functions. One of them is that the fermentation process breaks down the size of the pollen granules so a baby can eat it. So it's not eating a head of broccoli, it's eating something that's much more mushy and absorbable. The other thing, though, is that it's integrating that the internal biome from the bee family, into the baby bees, so that they're capable of passing that along and being healthy too. So it's really wonderfully magnificent how that all works together.
Yeah, I was reading last night that when the bees bring back nectar, basically, and hand it over to another bee, it might get handed over to many bees before it finally winds up in the cell. So at each point, there's more enzymes and things going into it all along the way before it's packed into the cell. And this just creates a whole new opportunity for different organisms and different things, a great way to feed bees, and nobody could complain about this. Nobody can say that you're hurting their bees by doing this. Nobody can say you're creating mite bombs by doing this. This is a really harmless, natural beekeeper kind of fix that I think we should really promote, and I'll start using it. And I would love to see, as you make them or tuck them under your hives, send us photos. Because I want to do, oh, this is so crappy, but I've
That's all
done,
that's needed.
yeah, really, this is all that's needed,
I
thank
can't build
God.
a top bar hive by myself, but I could probably do this.
Yes, anybody could do this. So what I'd like to do is take like a 5-minute break and let us do a little potty run, and then I'm going to turn it over to Thea, who's going to talk about some of the just wonderful good luck we've had with getting some of our projects on the map. And I want to have Brian have a chance to talk a little bit about the initiative that he's working on with Rain Rialto about getting Portland pesticide free.
And I want to spend 2 minutes talking about what I'm reading this month.
And Jacqueline wants to talk about what she's reading this month. So let's take 5 minutes, everybody.
So